Okay, good luck, everybody. Thank you so much for joining our live webinar. You know, most of our souls are reincarnated. The soul comes down time and time again to fulfill and complete its godly mission. Very rarely does a new soul come down to this world. For a reincarnated soul to come down, it takes a year of preparation in heaven. For a new soul, it takes 3 years. On Rosh Hashanah 1744, the Baal Shem Tov was in an elated mood. He said it was revealed to him in heaven that a new soul was about to come down to this world, and his teachings would pave the way for the coming of Mashiach. And lo and behold, on the 18th of Elul that year, which by the way was the Baal Shem Tov's birthday, on the 18th of Elul that year, which was 1745, the Alter Rebbe was born, Shneur Zalman of Liadi, the founder of Chabad. Now, Rabbi Kesselman will tell us a little bit more about the Alter Rebbe's life, and that will be followed by incredible stories of the Rebbe told to us by Rabbi Karlebach. So over to you, Rabbi Kesselman.
A good Tavach. Welcome, everybody. We are talking one of the biggest giants in Jewish history. The idea, his name was Shneur, means Shnei Or, 2 lights. He illuminated the world with the 2 lights of the revealed part of Torah and with the Chassidus, the secrets of Torah. He wrote the main books was the Shulchan Aruch. He was appointed by his teacher, the Mezritcher Maggid, who was the successor of the Baal Shem Tov, to write the Shulchan Aruch. And then he wrote the book of the Tanya, who became the Torah Shebeksav, the Chumash of secrets of Torah. Now, as all Jewish really great leaders, starting from Moshe Rabbeinu and David HaMelech, the big things that burned in the neshama was the love for another Jew. That was the first and the main thing. The same thing with the Alter Rebbe, as a young child who was already known as a genius. He would go to the marketplace and stand up on a wagon or something that he could find when there was a lot of people there. But after the pogroms of Chmielnicki, it was 50, 60 years before that, everybody piled into the cities and there was a big balagan. And he would lecture and encourage people to go to find jobs in the fields, in growing these vegetables, and to go out of the big cities. This wasn't a good place, didn't work for the people so well. And he managed to convince many people to go to work back. And his father had a big estate, and many people got jobs in his father's estate of doing different things. The other story said when he was 12 years old, he was giving a shiur in the Beis Medrash for great giants in astronomy, a connection to the Rambam in the new moon, how to calculate when the new moon will be, and many of them completely blown away. On his bar mitzvah, he was given the title that from the Gemara that was given to Rav, was the first generation of Amoraim, Rav Taneu Polig. It means that Rav, even so he was officially a Meir from the Talmud, not from the Mishnah, he was allowed to argue if he really wanted, even with the Tanoim of the Mishnayos. The Alter Rebbe was given the title that he's allowed to argue with anybody, even the big scholars. Basically, he wrote around 50 books what we have today printed. There's many got burnt, but 50 books what we have, as I said, and different kind of ideas of books. And the main books again is the Shulchan Aruch and the Tanya. There is an interesting story that I don't know, the Hashgacha Pratis that came to me a few times in the last few days. I decided that's the story I have to tell. Even so, when I was thinking about the story, I didn't know if it was the appropriate story for tonight. The Alter Rebbe arrived in a town one time, and they came to him that they have a big problem. What's the problem? And he said many Gedolei Yisrael already dealt with it, and everybody said it's forbidden. There was a woman that married to a great person, a genius scholar. And what used to happen to her from when she got married, always when she was counting the 7 pure days in order to go to the mikveh, she would find a stain of blood on her clothing. And after the Rav looked at it, he said, this is a blood stain. So she had to start counting again. This way, she lived for 2 years and could never be with her husband. They sent disdains and questioned to many Rabbanim, and all said nothing they could do about it. This is blood and it's also. So they came to the Alter Rebbe and they showed to him. He looked at it and he said, halachically, there is no way I could say that it's not blood of a human being, but I'm convinced that it's not blood of a human being, it's blood from a bird. And therefore he has a solution, because he cannot give you a heter. What is the solution? He said, that from when she starts counting the 7 pure days, they must take you to another house where nobody will know where she is, away from her house, and nobody is allowed to come in. It's quarantined for, like similar what they have today, you could relate to that. For 7 days she has to be over there. The only 2 people who are allowed to be into that house and know where she is her father and her mother. And then the night of the mikveh, her mother must go with her alone, nobody must know about it, and to go to the mikveh when the old women are already gone, everybody are out, and nobody must be there. That's his suggestion of solution. But they did it, and they did that, and it worked out fantastic. But your husband, being a very God-fearing person, said, after 2 years, sounds too good. So he waited another month, and then, but he said forever, that's the way it has to be now. When she goes to 7 pure days, she must be in another house. Nobody should know where she is. The only people who have access to it is her father and mother. And it was also good, and that's how purified. Few months later, came a plague in that place, in that area. But the Rabbanim said that everybody has to do tshuva, and if somebody needs help from a Rav, he should come to the Rav, and he'll help him to do tshuva. A woman came to the Rav, and she said to him she wants to tell her story, what she did something wrong, but she's afraid that maybe that she has to find a way how to do tshuva. She was a woman, a girl looking for a shidduch, and there was a genius guy in the city, and they tried to get him. And her friend, that girl, managed to marry that girl, that Goen, and she was left with a simpler guy. So again, so her friend, as far as she was very jealous of her friend, that her friend made a much better shidduch, and she was left with a simpler guy. So her jealousy and anger came out in such a way that she tried to be friendly, acting friendly with this friend. And always in the 7 days of purity, of purifying herself, the 7 days they have to be clean, she would come with blood of a bird, and she would stain her without her feeling what's happening. That she was doing it, torturing her for 2 years, till she couldn't do it anymore. So the story came out where the idea had happened. Basically, what we are saying, that the Alter Rebbe was in different ways trying to help people in different ways, but that was their life devotion completely. Another interesting thing, he got married when he was 15 years old. Got married with Yudaleb Segal, who was one of the richest Jews in the country at that time. Very, very wealthy person, but very also coming from the Maral Miprog, from David and Shlomo Melech, grandchildren. Very respected family. So they spoke him to the shidduch. So he said he agreed with the shidduch, very special girl, but he has one condition. That was obvious that his father was going to support him with nadin, what he gives. So nadin means a dowry, what the father of the kala, especially if he has, give to support the chassan. So he said he wants the nadin 5,000 ruble, whatever it is. It's a tremendous amount of money at that time, but also with a condition that his father will give him the money, and him and his new wife, they will decide what to do with the money. He's not allowed to advise anything, to suggest anything. Saying, cannot hear me? So you're going out and coming back in. Should I stay in? I should go out also.
No, I can hear you. You're perfect.
Somebody sent me a message. Said, okay.
No, that's just to me that.
Okay. So the Alter Rebbe said, on the condition that him and his wife are the only one who have the right to decide what to do with the money, and the in-laws have no right to suggest, to interfere, and to criticize. So, okay, he agreed, but what don't you do for getting such a son-in-law? And after he got married, they took the money and they bought land and equipment, and they settled hundreds of families in giving them parnasa. Some of them was a loan in good conditions, and there was long-term loan. Everyone ever needed, but he managed to settle hundreds of families to be able to have parnassah, who before was struggling with that. That was the idea when he was 15. He gave the whole money spent on that. And the story goes that later his in-laws were not so happy with his baby. He was learning and davening till late at night. And then he had to leave them. At the age of 19, he went to Mizritcha Magid because he said there was two centers in the world. One of Nigla was Vilna, where the Vilna Gaon was there. And one was Mizrich, where the Mizritcha Magid was there. So he said, learning I know a little bit, but davening I don't know. And he went to Mizrich, to the Magid. The first 2 weeks he was still not sure if he's going to stay there or not, because he was basically into learning. And he said they were davening a lot. But then he saw the genius of the Magid. He heard his teaching, so he stayed there. And now we'll jump over to a very interesting story of about Rebbe at the end of his life. I'm jumping, then we'll come maybe to the middle. Napoleon at that time decided to attack different countries around him, and he was going to attack Russia also. Now there became an argument between the tzaddikim who should win the war, if Napoleon should win or Russia should win. But Russia were able to push off Napoleon. Majority of the Chaverim, of the friends of the Alter Rebbe, was with the opinion that Napoleon should win. Why? Because Napoleon was going to make the revolution of making it equal everybody, and physically would be better for the Jews if Napoleon would win. The Alter Rebbe said, I agree with you, physically it will be better, but spiritually it will be much worse. Because Napoleon is coming from a way of negativity. What he knows, Napoleon, or what he doesn't know, he was a power of negativity in order to assimilate the Jews. In other words, the enemy of the Jewish people in history have two faces. One is hate, killing, murdering, torturing the Jews, as we saw plenty in the Holocaust. But equally as bad, and maybe even worse, you have to be careful what we're saying now, is sometimes a real enemy comes as a friend, as we said in the story, comes as a friend and assimilating the Jewish people. And Alter Rebbe says that he sees that if Napoleon will win, physically it will be better, but in a spiritual sense, it could be much worse. And interesting, the story is that heaven decided that whoever will blow shofar first on that Rosh Hashanah, he will get it his way. And the representative of his Chaverim, whoever it was, the story goes sometimes he was Shlomo Karliner, but he was already passed away, it wasn't him. He was up early in the morning and he knew that as soon as it became day, he started davening very fast and he got to blowing the shofar. He took the shofar to blow the shofar. He said, they used to call the Alter Rebbe the Litvak. He said, the Litvak already blew shofar. So what happened? And I'm going to say it a little bit in a jokey way. The Alter Rebbe was a Chabadnik, a Lubavitcher. Now, what is Chabad doing? We're going before davening early, before we go to daven ourselves, we go and blow shofar in the hospitals, in shopping centers, wherever you could find a Jew, you blow shofar. So we are not limited to blowing, we are used to not blowing shofar after in the middle of davening in the right place. From the early morning, you have to have a shofar with you and you're going to shul. Hopefully this year we'll be able to go to shul. Or you got first early in the morning to the hospital, or you go to old age home, or you go to the shopping centers, or you go to a neighbor, wherever you go, and you blow shofar. So Chabad blows shofar, not after in davening in the middle. They blow the shofar in the middle of davening also, but anyway, so he got it his way. What was fascinating about this story, the Alter Rebbe took a tremendous interest in Russia should win, to a point. He had a chassid, Rebbe Meislish, who actually, great-grandchildren of him are my neighbors in Kfar Chabad, my parents' neighbors I'm talking about in Kfar Chabad. The father of the family passed away, but his son lives there and his wife lives there, Rebbe Meislish. So he told Moshe Meislish that he wanted him to get into the headquarters of Napoleon's military and to become a spy. Now, the strength of Moshe Meislish was, why was he able to do it? He was a genius in languages. In addition to be a genius in Nigle and in Chassidus, and actually he was the secretary of the Bezdin. He was taking care of all the codes and writing them down and summarizing them and giving them out. So he was a genius. So he spoke excellent French in excellent Russian. So he said to him, try to get the job there as a translator, because the Napoleon's army, when they came in, they needed translators because they're coming from French and they need to do what's happening there. So he got the job first in the lower level of translator, and they were very impressed with him. And they took him higher until they took him mamish with the top generals, when Napoleon used to speak to the generals, and he was there helping them in translation. And they started seeing, and he got information. He saw what's happening, the plans, the maps, and he was sending it over to the Alter Rebbe. The Alter Rebbe gave it over to the military of the Russians. And certain places, attacks, the Russians, there's certainly around Vilna was a specific, very big base that they saw that the Russians were waiting for them, and they hunted them over there. So Napoleon said, there is a spy, and he walks in, he sees a chassid, Vashene Weisse border, bigger than mine, a smaller, standing over there. So he walks over there, he puts his hand on his heart, he says, you're a spy. So Mesha Meidlich, without blinking an eye, without missing a beat or beating too extra, he said to him, Your Honor, I am a translator here, everybody knows me here, and I'm working and everything this. And he was trying to see if his heart is some mamish nothing. And then he did the second time. He threw in the door, he was, because it happened another story, he put, and the guard almost shot Napoleon because the way he came in was so wild. And he walked over to him again and said, you are the spy here. And he said, and Ramesha Meidlich said that the Aleph base, the foundation of Chassidus, saved his life. What was the Aleph base of the Alter Rebbe? That by birth in nature, a person is really, the mind controls your heart. And he said that as a Chassid, that is one of the first thing you have to internalize yourself. And I was thinking that maybe they tell me to stop talking here. Anyway, so it said that's
5 more minutes, Rebbe.
How much?
5 more minutes.
5 more minutes. What I'm going to say first. Okay, good. Fine. Anyway, so that is the Alter Rebbe. So, and the Russian army were very, very appreciated the help that the Alter Rebbe gave them, to a point they gave him a whole wagon of soldiers just in case he'll need it, because the Alter Rebbe did not want to be under the control of Napoleon for 1 minute. So when they came into the city of the Alter Rebbe, was at that time it was Ladi, as they knew they were coming, they packed up everything on the wagons and they drove out. And that's when he, on that road, basically a few months later, he passed away. But it was aggravation for the whole thing. But also they gave him honorary, say they said, Ezrach Nechbad Ledorotav, as honorary citizen for generations forever. That Alter Rebbe had that title for himself and for his children and grandchildren, to a point that the Friedrich Rebbe, previous Lubavitcher Rebbe Yosef Yitzchak in Russia, when they took him to jail, asked him, what is your title? He said, my title is Ezrach, is the honorary citizen for generations. They didn't like it, but that was the... So we get another story that the Alter Rebbe was in jail 53 days the first time. He was accused that he's helping, sending money to Turkey, or Turkey was then in a rivalry with Russia. So he said 53 days, he said, corresponding to the 53 days of the book of Tanya. So one time, a minister, they realized that he's tremendous genius and in many connections with different, in science and everything that in mathematics that he solved. So these ministers used to come and ask him questions in science, in maths, in different things. They would enjoy talking to him, and that really helped them a lot in coming out. So a minister came in, said that he's very educated in Jewish studies in the Bible. And he said he wants to ask him a question. I said, okay. So he said, why, when the other Mauritians sinned with the tree of knowledge, why did the Eibishter ask him, Ayeko, where are you? Hashem, God knows where he is. So the Rebbe tells him that Rashi says that because she didn't want to frighten him, he wanted to like come in. So he said, where are you? Not to frighten him. So he said, I know what Rashi said. I want to know what your answer is. So the Alter Rebbe said, you believe that Torah is for eternal, is a lesson forever and ever for every one of us? He said, yes. I said, if that's the case, I could answer you. The Eibishter is asking every person for example, if somebody is the age, this and this, like 48, you don't know what age is, when I told him exactly his age, ask him, Ayeko, where are you in fulfilling your purpose in life, your purpose in the world, but you came down? What did you accomplish? What did you do? He was completely blown away. So from the message and how he told him his age, what are you doing? And you must make sure to be able to do it. And it's interesting to finish off, the Alter Rebbe said later that this minister with his question, where are you, really saved his life. Why? He said when he was in jail, in one hand he was suffering, on the other hand, the fact that he had this schus, merit, to sit in jail for the honor for Chassidus, for helping Jewish people, and for the Baal Shem Tov and for the Mizrach Magid, it gave him such a pleasure that he almost passed out of pleasure. It's called Kleis HaNefesh, expiring of the soul from having godly pleasure. So when this minister told him, Ayeko, where are you? He understood that divine providence, the Rebbe is sending a message to that minister, where are you? Who is giving you permission to have such a pleasure and have expire and dying from pleasure of God, closest to godliness when you still have a mission? What did you do today? What do you have to do tomorrow? And that helped him to bring himself down to be able to stay in that world. Should I give one more story from J.B. Soloveitchik?
100%.
So J.B. Soloveitchik, who is the head of Yeshiva University and the head of the modern Orthodox movement in the world, who passed away a few years ago, it was by the Rebbe. So I heard it in a recording from him himself telling the story. He said the story, how it came in tradition of their family. He was a great-grandson of Reb Chaim Volozhin, who was the student number 1 of the Vilna Gaon. And that is the story goes in the family, and he heard it from his father, from his grandfather. That the Alter Rebbe came to the Vilna Gaon to make shalom, to talk open and up. He came with Mendel Vitebsk, according to their tradition, they say he came with Rabbi from Berdichev, and they told them the Gaon will not see you. They came, they insisted in coming, they came, and so he asked, where is the Gaon? So they told him the Gaon is upstairs. So he went upstairs, the steps, and the door was a little bit open, but it was locked. So they knocked on the door. So he said, who was the Chassidim? So the Vilna Gaon climbed out of the window. And he said to his Talmidim later that I saw the Rov, the Alter Rebbe, call him. I saw him from the crack of the door, and I saw that if I'm opening the door, I will walk out together with him. And because he was convinced that Chassidus has problems, he said he didn't want that, and that's why he climbed out. Baruch Hashem, now, after so many generations, they are living together in harmony, and everyone is completing what his shlichus, what he has to do, which complete our shlichus, and to bring the revelation of Mashiach, but that has to be before Tezvav of, but they said, a good tevach, a good year. Welcome to Rabbi Karlebach.
A good Tevach. Thank you, Harav Kesselman, for the very, very interesting biography and stories you shared with us of the founder of the Chabad movement, the Alter Rebbe, the first Rebbe of Chabad. And as I have been for the past few weeks, I will continue telling stories of our Rebbe, who's a descendant, a great-great-grandchild of the Alter Rebbe, and the 7th of the Rabbeim following in the Alter Rebbe's footsteps. As Rabbi Kesselman mentioned, that the Baal Shem Tov in his time was a revolutionary, the Alter Rebbe in his time was a revolutionary, and I would say the Rebbe himself, in the most positive way, was a very, very big revolutionary. And one of the meanings I mean by a revolutionary is that most people react to historic events. The Rebbe was a person who didn't react, but acted. He innovated and changed so much of what we take for granted today. It's phenomenal what the Rebbe did in his time. Just as one example, in 1952, the Rebbe organized an organization called Neshei Ubnois Chabad. This was way before women's lib or empowering women. And yet the Rebbe organized that the women should take a forefront in all activities. In fact, once a year, I think it was once a year, maybe more, but I recall when I was in 770, where the Rebbe spoke exclusively to the women. The men had to leave and the Rebbe came down to speak to the women. At that time, it was unheard of that such a thing should happen. But I would like to go in to beginning with the Rebbe's mitzvah, the Rebbe's mitzvah campaigns, which literally changed the entire face of the Jewish world. And in 1967, that was my bar mitzvah year. I recall it was a schrecklich. It was scary for the entire Jewish world. I remember in the yeshiva, in the days and the weeks leading up to the 6-day war, Gamal Abdel Nasser Yamach Shemoy V'Zichroi, the president of Egypt, was continuously getting on to the news. It was carried, I was living in Montreal, it was carried in all the news. He threatened that he is going to destroy the entire land of Israel. He is going to make sure that he destroys, he annihilates every Jew living in Israel. He's going to dump them into the sea. Israel was a little tiny land, a fledgling land. It wasn't even 20 years old yet since 1948. The entire world expected the Arabs to be able to overrun the Jews. The fear was palatable. I remember in class, we gave up our recesses, we weren't playing, we gave up our lunch breaks, we just sat at our lunch at the desk and ate lunch, and the rest of the time we devoted to saying Tillim for Israel. It was, as I say, the world expected the worst. In fact, many consulates were giving their citizens who lived in Israel, they told them, get out quick. We'll even pay for your tickets. You're citizens of ours, just get out of Israel. And at that time, the sole voice that I know of that came with confidence, saying, don't worry, Israel is going to be the safest place in the world. As the Rebbe quoted, Israel is a place that the eyes of God and the divine providence is upon it from the beginning of the year till the end of the year. And there's no reason to be afraid. Israel will be victorious. The Jewish people will be victorious. At that time, it was almost like the laughingstock. And he asked that none of his Hasidim leave the land of Israel. And I remember, Rabbi Beryl Ruddle is here, and Rabbi Ruddle of Chabad of Norwood, Rabbi Mordechai Ruddle was here. The Ruddle family comes from Montreal. There was a Rabbi Yosef Ruddle. He owned Ruddle's bookshop, and he was one of the original Bachrim that came from Shanghai. And he had a son who was getting married at that time. He also had another son who was studying in Kfar Chabad, and he wanted to come for the wedding. So they asked the Rebbe, being that he said none of his Hasidim should leave Israel, does that include this Ruddle who's just a buck and wanting to come to his brother's wedding? And the Rebbe said, it includes everybody. I'm asking that in this case, he not go. And he missed his brother's wedding. He didn't go because the Rebbe felt that if he leaves, they could use it as any excuse. 2 days before the war broke out, the Rebbe at a Farbrengen spoke, and he quoted the verse. He said, the Torah says, in Chumash Devarim, V'ra kol amei ha'aretz, that all the nations of the world will see, Ki Shem Hashem Elekecha Nikra Lecha, that the name of God is called upon you, V'yaru mimeka, they will fear you. And the Gemara says, Elu Tefillin Sheberosh, that this fear, how do the nations see that the name of God is written upon you? It is the tefillin of the head. And when they see the tefillin Sheberosh, then that creates a fear. And for the first time, I think in history, the Rebbe encouraged his Hasidim to go out there and to put on tefillin with others. And he said that this will be the protection for the Jewish people. As I say, the idea of one Jew approaching another, saying, excuse me, are you Jewish? Would you like to do any of the mitzvahs? This is a total, it's not a reaction, it's an action. It is unheard of that I know of in Jewish history that anyone should be doing such a thing. The Chassidim began making what is called calls. They would make routes and go from office to office and putting on tefillin with the Jews. Now, the Rebbe started this campaign before the war broke out. And he said that this will be a protection and that there is nothing to fear about. I remember that day, it was a Sunday morning in Montreal, where I was hitchhiking to school. A Jewish guy picked me up and he had the radio on and it said that the war broke out. And we saw the most amazing miracles. The first day, they already knocked out the whole Egyptian Air Force. And Egypt were a bunch of liars. They told the rest of the Arab countries that we are winning. We're almost at Tel Aviv, they told them. In the meanwhile, they were losing like crazy. Their soldiers were running. They were just leaving their sandals and everything in the desert. The joke at that time was that the Egyptian tanks have 4 gears in reverse and 1 in forward. But they told the other Arab countries that they were winning the war. In fact, as I heard from the Rebbe at the time, the Israeli government did not want to take the old city. They thought it would be too many problems of Jerusalem. So they begged Jordan not to enter the war so that they don't have to get involved with the war. But Nasser Yamach Shemoy kept phoning up Hussein and saying, we're winning. If you want to take part, if you want to take an active part, you got to go into the war. So Jordan, in fact, attacked Israel while Egypt was already losing. And this led to the victory of the 6-day war and is getting the old city of Yerushalayim. So the Rebbe's first mitzvah, the mitzvah of tefillin, in 1967 is something that turned over the entire world. Till today, we have Baruch Hashem people all over the world going and putting on tefillin. I'd like to compliment our good friend and colleague, Rabbi David Haller. He has a list. I don't know how many people he puts on tefillin a day or a week. I don't know what it is like today, but certainly before the COVID, he spent basically hundreds and thousands of people that he put on tefillin with. But telling stories, I would like to tell you a story that I personally heard from the participant. And I came in 1970 to New York, and as a high school student, I went into the Ocean Parkway dormitory, and one of our teachers there was a Mr. Landsman. The secular teachers in Ocean Parkway, obviously we had our Judaic studies in the morning, and in the afternoon, we had the secular studies. So all our teachers that taught us secular studies were public school teachers. And the public school only went till a certain time. So they had already finished the public school's day. And to supplement their income, they came and taught us. And this guy, Mr. Landsman, was a secular Jew. He taught in the Lubavitcher Yeshiva for many years. Rabbi Hecht remembers him as his grade 8 teacher, science teacher, who had a very, very big impact on him. When I came, he was teaching in the high school, not in the elementary school. And a few years after we graduated, we had a high school reunion. And he came and told us this emotional story. People have heard various versions. I'll tell you the story as I remember it. When he started teaching at the Lubavitcher Yeshiva, he was still single. He was a very cool guy. And he got married to a Jewish girl, thank God, while he was still a teacher. And then he told us that a couple of years into the marriage, he and his wife, they had a baby boy. But they didn't have time to get to the hospital. And this baby was born in the kitchen of their home. And after it was born, they rushed mother and child to the hospital. Now, it seems like the ones who are really au fait with what to do with newborn babies work in the ward where babies are born in this hospital. And for some reason, being that they weren't, they ended up going into a ward which the nurses were not au fait with it. And somehow the nurse put drops into the baby's eyes. They were not the right drops. And they were poisonous for eyes. He told us there's 5 layers of over the cornea, and these were mainly burnt out. And Rachmana litzlan, the prognosis when they called the doctors is that this child might be blind for the rest of his life, because with so many levels burnt out, there's very little they can do. Now, over the years, this Mr. Landsman, we used to always, tell him stories about the Rebbe and all. He knew Rabbi Tenenbaum. He was the principal of the yeshiva at that time. And he called up Rabbi Tenenbaum, having heard the stories of the Rebbe that he had heard over the years. And he said, I'm desperate. My son, Rachmana litzlan, might be going blind. Please, I've heard so many stories of the Lubavitcher Rebbe. Can you please get a blessing for me? And he made the call. The reply that came back from the Rebbe was that he should put on tefillin every day. This Mr. Landsman got very upset. He said, tefillin, what does tefillin have to do with it? My son is deathly ill. He might be blind. I'm not interested now in this religious stuff. I need a blessing that he gets better. I don't want to be taken advantage of in this situation and all. And Rabbi Tenenbaum said, if the Rebbe tells you to put on tefillin He's not telling it to you to push religion down your throat. What he is actually doing is saying that the Torah, the spiritual world and the physical world is totally connected. You know, there are 248 positive commandments in the Torah, and according to our tradition, there's 248 limbs in a human body. And he said that each mitzvah is connected to a limb. And obviously, what the Rebbe says is that your son's eyes is connected to the mitzvah of tefillin. And this will be the key to your son's recovery. What do you have to lose? Put on your tefillin, and that will help your son. And he thought about it, and he said, what does he have to lose? He was so desperate, he would do anything for his son. And so he began putting on tefillin. And telling us this, he says, the absolute miracle happened, that they did surgery and it was successful. My son began seeing. The doctors were at a loss to understand. The only thing they could explain is that perhaps, being that the baby was such a young baby, it gave time for the genetics in the eye to recuperate. But it really didn't make sense to him. And then I remember him starting to cry. He said, but I want to tell you something. This is not the end of my story. That story happened quite a few years ago. My son is now, 5, 6 years old. And there happens a day that I'm in a terrible rush. I either woke up late or I was doing something, and I run out without putting on my tefillin. And I get a call from my wife that my son's eyes are bothering him. And I remember, I put on the tefillin, and his eyes become relieved. This is a story I heard from firsthand from our teacher that told us this story. The Rebbe's outlook and the Rebbe's look at the world was that the Torah, the mitzvahs, are not additions to our life. They affect our very physical life. And one works against the other. And if a person should take these words of the Torah in reality, when the Talmud says that the nations of the world will see that God's name is written upon you and they will fear you, this refers to tefillin sheberosh. The Rebbe took it literally. And he said that tefillin is the key to our saving. Rabbi Kesselman mentioned about the Alter Rebbe sitting in jail. I was told that someone, when in fact, both the Frierdiker Rebbe and the Alter Rebbe, the previous Rebbe was sitting in jail, as Rabbi Kesselman also mentioned, in Spalerka, and interrogators came to see him, and he was in the middle of davening. He had his tefillin on. He shooed them away, and amazingly, they left. When the Alter Rebbe was davening and they walked in, a dread and a fear overcame them. And so a Jew meeting the Alter Rebbe said, why is it that when they saw you, the words of the Torah came true, that they fled in dread? Why is it when they see me in tefillin, nothing happens? And the Rebbe answered that it says, Elu tefillin sheberosh. It should have said, these are the tefillin sha'al harosh, on the head. But it doesn't say sha'al, which means on. It says shibirosh, in the head. Because these tefillin, it depends how you wear them. When they become a part of you, they become within your head. That's when it really has the fear. But the Rebbe pointed out that it was the tefillin, the mitzvah of tefillin, that he started, that really had this effect and led to the victory at the Six-Day War. And then in 1974, the Rebbe started a whole new innovation. The Rebbe asked that we intensify the tefillin campaign. So some yeshiva students came up with a brilliant idea. They went to Hertz Rent-A-Car. Today it's Mechulai here, but they went to Hertz Rent-A-Car and they hired a big step van with an open back. I mean, it was a closed van, but the back there is empty. And they put in a table and some benches, and they started to go out into a major thoroughfare in Manhattan. And they stopped there. Eventually, they had music connected to this Hertz van, and they all piled out and just went into the streets and started to say, "Excuse me, are you Jewish? Excuse me, are you Jewish?" And I remember being a part of those mitzvah vans. I could tell you many, many stories of them, but it was like a weird thing. "Excuse me, are you Jewish?" This had never happened before, that people would walk onto the streets. And one thing we learned, that if a guy said no, then he's not. If he said anything else, then he's Jewish. For example, he said, "What's it your business? Why do you want to know? I'm a universalist," or anything else, but no, the guy was a Jew. And we started to approach him to put on tefillin. The reaction was electric. And the Rebbe at a Fabrengen was extremely pleased by the whole thing. And he called these vans, he called them a mitzvah tank. And he explained, he said that our sages teach us that the world was not worthy of gold. Why did Hashem create gold? In order to build it for the Beis HaMikdash. And everything that exists is there for the Hashem's purposes. What is a tank? A tank is a vehicle that has the ability to go through terrain which is inaccessible to soldiers. And a mitzvah tank is going to be able to bring Jewish practice to places that would otherwise be difficult to reach. And so he called it the mitzvah tanks. And we had all that summers, we used to go to Queens, we used to go to Manhattan. My place was on 35th Street. I recall meeting some of the people and the answers they would give. One guy told us he doesn't have to put on tefillin. We asked him why. He said, "Well, I never had a bar mitzvah." So he thought Nebuch that if he never had the party of a bar mitzvah, he doesn't have to put on tefillin. And so one of the guys said, "We're going to make you a bar mitzvah right now." He ran to a kosher bakery, he got a cake and a soda. They got him on to the back of that truck. And they said, "We're now making you bar mitzvah and putting on tefillin with you." And that's how they started with this guy. I remember meeting a guy in Manhattan. He had just come from Scotland. I said to him, are you Jewish? He says, no. Then he says, but I do have 25% Jewish blood within me. I said, 25%? How do you get that? He says, well, my mother's mother was Jewish. So I said, if that's the case, then you're not 25% Jewish, you are 100% Jewish. Come, put on tefillin, which he did. And you see how the Rebbe's Mivtzoim literally transformed the world. Today, it is accepted that you are able to do it. And after the winning of the Six-Day War, they started the campaigns by the Kotel. You meet so many people we met through the years. We'd ask them, when was the last time you put on tefillin? Some of them hadn't put it on since their bar mitzvah, but many of them said, when we were at the Kotel, we managed to put on tefillin. And the way the Rebbe also looked at it and explained was, there were so many people who had in those days opposition to it. One thing they said is, okay, was hast du schön aufgetan? What did you accomplish? You got some innocent schnook standing in Manhattan to put on tefillin once in his lifetime. And that's it. What did you accomplish with that? And the Rebbe pointed out, mitzvah geireres mitzvah, how one mitzvah brings another in its chain. And he would tell countless of stories of how from one person putting on tefillin once, it transformed his entire life. His entire being became changed as a result of that one-time tefillin. It wasn't always just acceptable by many other frum groups, the Rebbe's innovations, and the Rebbe's acting, not reacting, including the tefillin, including the neshek, the Ner Shabbos Kodesh that the Rebbe did. But we see from countless of people that this one mitzvah of putting on tefillin, number one, it protected the Jewish people, and number two, it transformed people completely. And this is really such an important thing for us today, especially when we have COVID. You know, I've been doing funerals lately, and you speak to people, and they will, much as they would like to say Kaddish, they are unable to. And I suggest to them, Kaddish, you need a minyan. It's not effective if you don't have a minyan. Tefillin, you don't. Tefillin, all you have to do now, we're not talking about the whole prayer. We're talking about tefillin, which is to put them on and to say the first portion of the Shema. It could take 3 minutes, and you resolve that this is your Kaddish. And even before COVID, I've spoken to many people when I visit them Shiva, and I'd say, organize Kaddish, but at least put on tefillin, which becomes your mitzvah. And people began doing it, and it changed their lives. That's what we found from the Rebbe's campaigns, how he literally brought people who were not practicing before. And it was unheard of for anyone to go out and encourage them to do even one mitzvah. And that one mitzvah was able to bring people back to Judaism. You know, there's a Malka Tauger, she wrote a whole book called Excuse Me, Are You Jewish? With that one line, how the entire world became transformed towards Yiddishkeit. And this is what we should ask ourselves. This is what we should ask our families. Not only, excuse me, are you Jewish, but what are we doing to show our Judaism and to make it effective And it is through doing all these mitzvahs that the Rebbe assured us, one more mitzvah will change the world to the good in general, and one more mitzvah will bring Mashiach speedily. So I want to wish you a good vach, but I'd also like to encourage you to stay on, because there's a short 8-minute video now on Tu B'Av. Wednesday is the 15th of Av. The Talmud tells us, "Lo hayu yomim b'Yisrael," there were no greater Yom Tovs in Israel like Yom Kippur and Chamisha Asa B'Av. And what happened on the 15th of Av was that the Jewish girls used to go out in borrowed white garments. They would dance in the fields and they would make shidduchim. They would tell the guys what to look for in a proper shidduch, and these shidduchim would made. This is a very beautiful Yom Tov. We don't say Tachnun, but I think that until the Rebbe really spoke about it, it was a theoretical day. It was a Yom Tov in name only. You will see now the teaching of the Rebbe of how it applies and how to make it practical in our own lives. He especially promoted Limud HaTorah, learning Torah from Chamisha Asa B'Av, and discussed its qualities and what it influenced in the year as well. Enjoy a good vach. Thank you for listening.
The Talmud states in Tractate Tainus, "Never were there more joyous days for the Jewish people than the 15th of Av and Yom Kippur." Yom Kippur is the day God forgave the Jewish people for the unforgivable, the sin of the golden calf. Forever after, it is the day when God's unbounded love and compassion are most revealed. But what's the story with the 15th of Av?
Bringt sich die Gemorre Kamot Taimim, was die Ausgeteiltkeit von Chamish Osir B'Yov, der Pirush Aposhet in Mishne, Halachas Kame v'Kame in Gemorre, ist das Lacher Churm Beis Sheni, wo der Pfarrer sich eine von den Taimim aufdruf, was nicht nur die Unione von Better, wo das gewähnt, Lacher Churm Beis Sheni, ist gewohnt gekommen, Likwura, wie Kajitzi Baseh, B'Yachad im See ist aber echt dort der Tam, und der End von der ersten Taimim, Abei Kolo Meise Mistbar, wo das ist gewähnt, noch Beschnass Harboyim, bei Jeson Bemidbar. Ich schien damals gewähnt der Tam, was der Gmorre rechnet uns als der Tam, was mir soll sein der Jontef von die Chamish Osir B'Yov. Afal Pekein ist Mide der Bedeir zugekommen noch Taimim, wie die Gemorre rechnet ist, 5, 6 Taimim, 6 Taimim beprotis, was beklolus ist das 5 Taimim, was alpizeh wird sich die Scheile, wie bald das geschehen dort, die Simcha, und sich verstandig hat das Simcha gedeile, was darf nun kommen zu Taimim shel Yachrizeh, wo das יש lämmer bepashtus, aber bisher ist zugekommen noch ein Tam, ist sich verstandig bepashtus, als es kommt zu, noch in der Simcha Sadover. So keine dem Simcha, was sie verbunden mit Chamisha Dvorim, wie a Simcha, was sie verbunden mit 1 Sache oder mit 2 Sachen וכו'. Okay, mit Duber amol Barucho, das kommt sich echt, behemschech, wo die Gemorre ist maflig in Zad ha-Bilti Rotzui, was es ist geteilt, Chashiv Osir B'Tammuz, und Yachrizeh Tisha B'Yov, Der Frau ist gewesen Chamisha Dvorim, und danach, bis kommt in Mida Tevo, ist dort der Chamisha Taime. Und der Ruf stellt sich Sidis Barucho, und Jusa, der Ruf, was sagt in Preetz Chaye, aber was ist der Tam, wo das ist verbunden mit Chamisha Osser Bo, ist sich jeder Ingen Bediuk, was ist das der Kescher mit Chamisha Osser Bechedisch, ist das, wie sagt in Preetz Chaye, aber das ist der Fall, wo demult kein Messire Bashlamusa. Und Israel ist auch dem im Lilvona. Apel Pi, was ich kein Messire Bashlamus in Chag HaMatzes Bitchilose und Chag HaSukkis Bitchilose. Chamish Osser Benissen, Chamish Osser Betishrei, kommt aber dort zu der Ingen, wie mis me war in der Drushim al Ingen sehr. Aber wie bald das kommt in der Siaro, was ich gewähnt in dem Maime Dumatzow von Tisheba, wo demult gewähnt der Tischlich mit Shamayim Oretz, der Inyan von Kol Inyoni Levone, ve Kayetze Beze Ayirido, Shen Yirido Lemata Mimen. Churben bei Srischen, Churben bei Sheni, und in der alle Iberik im Urois, wie rechnen Seisen stehen vom Sichte Teines. A Yeride ist auch Yeride Zelech Aliyah, ist davon verstandig, als hat a Yeride Gdele Bejese, muss sein an Aliyah Gdele Bejese. Es Emstake, der Jessie im Eretz Mitzrayim, ist Godmelo a Yeride von Golos Mitzrayim, aber dort gewähnt a Golos von Iden, wie sie seinen gewähnt Kede Matentere. Sein Dämmel gewähr Maminim, Bnei Maminim, Bnei Avrom, Yitzchak und Yanke. Afal Pikein, die Dämmel gewähr Kayemes, die Gzero, als Lienim, Le Jeder, Le Tachtene. Ist wie Aide gestanden, als Beteinelem Atachten, und befragt noch in Nervas Horetz in Mitzrayim, ist nie gewähr in der Schleimus, was das bekommen, noch Matentere. Bemele ist Tage a Yeride, Jore di Joradno, am ist gekommen von Mamodum und Matzovum, ist geworden a Vodim, Lepare bi Mitzrayim, das kommt aber nicht zu der Yeride von a Ben Melech, in welchen der Melech steht begolui, wo das gewähnt lachere Maten Tere Bitel ha-Gzeira, a Tachtenim Jaibel le Meile, und Lenim, jedo, Lemato und Afal Pikein kommt geht demult weg in Golus, Elehem Lebonim Shugolu mal Shulchan Aviyah. Wo der Loschen steht nicht auf Golus Mitzrayim. Und Pepashtus verstandig geht, wenn geworden Bonim mal Shulchan Aviyah, wenn es reingegangen in den Eretz Tevul Chova. Eretz asher tomid eina avaya lekecha bo, Bereishis Hashona v'adach Rishona. Alachas kame v'kame, wenn sie gekommen der Dienje von Beis Sheni, wie das sechet verstandig bepashtes, Leizipur Matzev Bnei Yisroel, wie sie gewähnen in Golus Bovel, kommt es nicht zu der Yeride bepashtes, da viele Begashmis, Alachas kame v'kame beruchnis, lachre Churben bei Sheni. Wo der Pfarrer damals zugekommen, der indische Lebeerach, was sie da in Tischebo, und befragt noch den Tischebo, was sie verbunden mit dem Churben bei Sheni. Wo der Pfarrer sehe, der Chamish Osser Beor, wo damals die Keime Sire Bashlamusa, lachre der Yeride von Tischebo, und nicht nur der Tischebo von Beis Rischen, nur noch niedriger von Beis Sheni, muss das sein a Yeride hachig Dele. Bis wann das wird dämmert, lehoi und Tevim L'Yisrael, wie Chamish Osser Bo, wie Yom Kippurim.
Thank you all for joining us. Good vach. Please join us tomorrow night for our speaker live from Israel. And tomorrow morning, we also have a beautiful parents and grandparents webinar. Please join us and have a great evening. Thank you.